They say themselves in these papers that they filed that this is under the Presidential Records Act. So what they did was to try and criminalize Donald Trump, as they always do. They found these three mundane statutes, espionage and the two others, obstruction, and they're trying to claim that there was some sort of criminal activity.
Mundane statute? New spin from one of Donald Trump's attorneys as the former president and his legal team struggle to get their story straight when it comes to the top secret documents seized from Mar-a-Lago. Welcome back to Morning Joe. It is Thursday, September 1st. Jonathan Lemire is still with us. In just a few hours, a federal judge will rule on whether to appoint an independent party to review classified documents seized at former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. NBC's Hallie Jackson has more.
A defiant response this morning from the Trump team, arguing it should have been fully anticipated that the former president would have had sensitive materials at his home, describing the documents as his own presidential records, even though the law says they belong to the government, and suggesting the National Archives should have simply followed up in a good faith effort to get those classified records back.
The Trump reply basically says, well, why didn't these parties just keep negotiating over these documents? DOJ's whole point is, they tried that. It didn't work. They tried a subpoena. It didn't work. They had to go to a search warrant.
Mr. Trump's team arguing without a so-called special master to review the classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago, unchecked Justice Department investigators could selectively leak and publicize aspects of their investigation. The Trump team also says this photo showing classified material was gratuitously included in the DOJ's filing earlier this week, and say the documents were spread across the floor for dramatic effect. They call a description of a June 3rd meeting where investigators visited Mar-a-Lago in person significantly mischaracterized. The Justice Department says that's when Mr. Trump's attorneys swore they'd done a diligent search for any classified material, although FBI agents found dozens of documents at Mar-a-Lago, including several in the former president's personal office.
That is not the way his office looks. Anybody that knows President Trump's office, he has guests frequently there.
That could undercut his attorney's arguments. The material was held in, quote, a secure setting. From Republicans, mostly silence on the DOJ developments.
I don't have any observations about that.
But Mr. Trump himself has hardly been silent, posting dozens of inflammatory messages and bizarre conspiracy theories on his social media platform, in his most explicit support yet of QAnon, whose followers claim satanic, cannibal pedophiles secretly run the government. Mr. Trump showing images of top Democrats, implying they're the enemy, and demanding he be reinstated as president, or else a new election should be held immediately, which federal law does not allow.
Donald Trump is trying to keep his base engaged, and he's trying to use them as leverage against people like Merrick Garland and Joe Biden.
So that's NBC's Hallie Jackson with that report. Of course, the problem is that as he tries to engage his ever smaller base, his ever more intense base, talking about civil war. We've seen the Wall Street Journal pull out this morning. He's turning off a lot of suburban voters, a lot of higher educated voters, a lot of independents, a lot of women, especially in the suburbs. And you actually see for the first time a head-to-head matchup where Joe Biden is now up 6 points over Donald Trump if the election were held today, which, of course, I know it's meaningless in so many ways, but it certainly is not inside the Republican Party. As Republicans try to figure out how to start separating themselves from Donald Trump, because they understand he's costing them so much in 2022, they don't want a repeat of 2024. And there's that head-to-head matchup. Willie, the only other thing I want to just bring up out of Hallie's package is the fact that if there were anybody, if there were a grown-up in charge in Trump's operation, they would say to him, Mr. President, you've got to stop sending your lawyers on television shows. I know you want to fight this politically, but you're damaging yourself legally. And he's in the legal fight of his life right now. And he keeps sending lawyers out who keep undermining all of his arguments and actually making arguments for the government when you have a lawyer not even associated with this case saying she rifled through all of these top secret documents. It's crazy how much they're damaging their own political and legal standing.
And he's doing the same with each of his latest posts that he puts up on social media, changing excuses and explanations of what happened. But you're right, the one attorney that's been out the last couple of days is not working on this case. She's working on a case for Donald Trump in New York. But her defense, as we just heard a minute ago there, is that the FBI took these documents out of Donald Trump's cartons or wherever he said he had them and spewed them out just chucked them out on the floor and made it look like he left them on the floor. Is that really their argument, that they were messy with it? No, that's an evidence photo, as most people know. So they're really grasping at straws here as the Justice Department appears to be presenting more and more information that could lead one expert to assume that an indictment may come. Let's talk to senior legal affairs reporter at Politico, Josh Gerstein. Josh, I know you're down there in Florida awaiting this latest hearing. So what did you take away from the filing last night from President Trump's lawyers? They don't really get at the questions around obstruction where the Justice Department may be headed here.
That's right, Willie. They make some sort of technical arguments about what they think a special master should do, but they don't sort of combat this really sort of staggering scenario that the Justice Department laid out on Tuesday, that when this grand jury subpoena for these records was served, that Trump's lawyers basically submitted a false affidavit saying that they'd done a diligent search of the whole area and had found nothing that was marked classified besides what had already been returned. And they don't explain why they said that. They don't advance Trump's claims that he declassified some of these documents. And I think, as Joe and Mika were saying, it's not only the public combat here, but just the very fact of this special master they're asking for going to court and litigating this search. This is Trump's decision to handle it this way, to have this kind of information come out. And so far, all he seemed to accomplish is put a lot more facts on the public record that we didn't already have, and even get a judge in Washington to sort of set aside grand jury secrecy and say, well, if you're going to cause a court fight over this, we may as well put even more of this information in the public record. There's a reason most people who are under serious federal criminal investigation, you know what they do? They keep quiet. They keep quiet and they try to negotiate behind the scenes, and that's obviously not what Trump is trying to do here.
Donald Trump incapable of keeping quiet, Josh. We certainly know that. So you're right in that his team's effort to try to get this special master open the door for DOJ to put all this stuff out and better frame their narrative. But let's return to the idea of a special master. We should get an outcome on that, ruling on that shortly, next day or so, I believe. Were one appointed, just walk us through what that would mean for the case. What would be the pros and cons, if you will, the benefits and the detractions for the Trump team if a special master is suddenly assigned?
Well, Jonathan, a special master would be usually a retired judge or some other very esteemed attorney. In this case, they'd need somebody who already has a top secret SCI clearance, which is the top level of national security clearance, who it sounds like what they would basically be doing is checking the FBI's work and making sure that a relatively modest number of potentially attorney-client privileged documents that the FBI set aside in this initial search, that was done properly. Now, there's a broader question here where Trump is trying to say that a whole bunch of these records, not just the classified stuff, but unclassified stuff, is covered by executive privilege. And that's a little bit of a baffling claim to have raised at this stage of this investigation. And if the special master, if the judge allows the special master to get into that issue, I think we're going to have a big imbroglio because like I said, a lot of lawyers say there's no role here for executive privilege. I suspect if this is confined to a modest number of attorney-client documents, the Justice Department will say, fine, go ahead and check our work. It's going to maybe set us back a few weeks, but it's not a big deal. But if this judge, who is a Trump appointee, wants to broaden the role of the special master to oversee a number of different potential privileges and issues, then I think you'll see DOJ appeal what we expect to be her decision to appoint a special master in this Trump search.
Senior legal affairs reporter at Politico, Josh Gerstein, thank you very much. And of course, we're going to have a lot more on this story in just a few minutes. We want to turn